Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Blue Raider Podcast, hosted by Jake Bolden and presented by the Conseco Group General Contracting and Mighty Dog Roofing. Don't miss another Tuesday episode by subscribing to the podcast on all streaming platforms or catch our visual presentation uploaded every week on YouTube. Don't miss our next ticket giveaways by subscribing and following on all Blue Raider Podcast social media accounts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Blue Raider Pod. Thanks for tuning in to the Blue Raider Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Bolden. In today's episode, we are covering the home football loss to Liberty this last weekend with the SSN curator of the X Twitter account and reporter, Jonathan House. Today's the big face reveal for Jonathan, and then stick around for Sam Doughton to join us once again, where we will be touching base on all things fall sports as those seasons are coming to an end and we start to move into basketball season. So lots of hoops talk as well as your miscellaneous MTSU athletic talks with Sam. Always good to have both of these guests on today. Before we roll into the episode, I want to take just a second to thank our sponsors, and we will start things off with Mighty Dog Roofing. When it comes to your home, trust Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East for all your needs. As a veteran and locally owned business, we're honored to be one of just 11 Owens Corning contractors nationwide to win their prestigious service award. From roofing and gutters to windows and siding, our expert team delivers top quality craftsmanship and unmatched service. We're here to protect your home with pride and precision. Choose Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East, where excellence is a tradition. Call us today at 615 MD Roofs, that's ROOFS, or visit their website at mightydogroofing.com to schedule your free quote today. And of course, thanks to the Conseco Group. Since 1987, the Conseco Group has been turning dreams into reality, whether it's pre-construction consulting, construction management, design build, or renovations and improvements. They're here to exceed your expectations. At Conseco Group, we don't just deliver, we deliver with passion, precision, and unparalleled quality. Our hands-on approach ensures your investment is maximized and your vision is brought to life. From Clarksville down to Columbia and beyond, trust Conseco Group to handle every detail with expertise and care. If you're ready to build your future, contact the Conseco Group today at 615-298-9907 or visit their website at consecogroup.com. That's CONSECO Group.com. Again, thanks to Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East and the Conseco Group for sponsoring today's episode. Now, without further ado, we will get into our first guest. As I teased at the very beginning, we will be talking everything about the home game this last Saturday against the Liberty Flames, where the team ultimately fell 37-17. But joining us from Sideline Sports, it is Jonathan House. Jonathan, how's it going?
Hey, it's going well, man. I really appreciate you letting me on.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk so many things with you about the football game, as well as we might talk a little hoops there at the end. But before we go into what we're going to be talking about, I want to take just a second to highlight what Coach Mason said at the opening of his presser this last week, because I think there's a lot of good tidbits in there. So we'll roll that clip for us.
Yeah, our football team, today, and just for us, I thought we had some momentum early, with some turnovers and had some opportunities. But, for us, the ability to capitalize just slipped through our fingers. So, I told our guys afterwards, we have to continue to not be about the peaks and valleys, of how football's played. Hey, man, you're going to have mistakes. Hey, we can work through the mistakes. I just think for us, just the ability of, our guys to put it away and continue to keep playing and focus, because way too many penalties in this ball game. Penalties kill drives, and I think for us, there were times where I thought we thwarted momentum, but gave it right back, due to penalties, and then there were other times, like in this ball game, where we couldn't get off the field. And I think the important thing is, defensively, you got to find a way to stop the run. I knew that was going to come at us. We knew it was going to come at us, and just didn't do it well enough today to get the ball back to our offense, and didn't execute well enough on offense. So the end result is what you saw today. So Blue Raiders got to be better.
Well, he said it there at the top, or at the very end there, about they just got to be better. And I think the sentiment has been the same all season long about not executing on both ends of the ball, as well as the penalties becoming an issue. We saw there in the middle of the game where you had an opportunity to even get some momentum back, and you had a procedural penalty on special teams, followed up by another penalty of offsides on a quarterback sneak, which they ultimately ended up scoring, taking a lead, and that was the end of that. So, Jonathan, I mean, I've talked about this ad nauseum all season thus far, but again, this kind of being your first time on the show, what's kind of your thoughts not only on this game on Saturday, but collectively for this entire season?
So on the season, we at SSN at Sidelines, Sports Network, we always, we on occasion we'll do like our preview magazine or whatnot. It's an online article or whatnot. This year we didn't get around to doing it. But in my preseason article, I had said, for Mason's first year, having 60 plus or new faces on the team, I was like, maybe 3 to 4 wins it's not generous, but it's where I feel that we were as a program. You're coming from what was it, 18 years with the former coach, and a lot of your key players transferred out, whether they graduated or they just went somewhere else, greener pastures, whatever. Like I said, three wins, 4 wins, kind of where I saw us this year. Mason has to have time to get his guys in. He has to have time to instill his defensive mind. Like, that's just how it is. His track record at Vanderbilt, it was what it was. But I mean, aside from James Franklin and now Clark Lee this season alone, who's won at Vanderbilt? You can't really use that as material to throw at a head coach in a head coaching search, in my opinion. Mason's brilliant whenever it comes to football, mindset wise. I think that him recruiting in the mid-state, absolutely phenomenal. Stock kind of steered away from that over the years. And I know that a lot of Middle Tennessee fans are excited. The attendance for the Vets games was around 13,000 plus. I believe it was around that for the last game as well. This time, the last few years, you average 9,000. Whether that's just inflated, tickets or whatever, inflated numbers. But, I think that it's obvious that him recruiting in the state of Tennessee in the mid-state has definitely turned some heads, despite the record. Talking about the game against Liberty, we allowed 340 rushing yards, which is insane. But that's kind of been our problem all season. We haven't really been able to stop the run. That's come from really good running backs to mobile quarterbacks like Jackson Dart at Ole Miss, Caden Salter. Salter and Cooley, their Liberty's running back, they have, I believe, I did some stat breakdown. They have over almost 1,300 yards out of Liberty's almost 2,000 rushing yards on the season. That's absolutely insane for a quarterback running back duo. And you saw it the other day. Liberty's offense is very run heavy, and it's very much like, hey, let's just toss it off to the side and one of our guys are going to go. We saw some pretty cool reversals. We saw some trick plays. It was, if I were from an unbiased media standpoint, that game would have had everything I wanted from Liberty's offense from the second quarter on. It was just entertaining. It was exciting, But, if you add that deadly rushing attack that they have and our defense, the Blue Raider defense allowing over 207 yards a game, and that's just rushing, that's pretty much a recipe for disaster, in my opinion, especially coming against an offensively loaded Liberty team.
Right, yeah, and that was kind of the whole point of preparing for a game like this, was because of that factor that their wide receiving room was diminished due to injuries. Like I spoke with Fan the Flames podcast last week, is you got to stop the run. We know Quentin Cooley's good. We know that Caden Salter has been a dual threat, and as you already touched on, the amount of yards that those two alone amass has been impressive. Very similar to that of like Tyler Huff and Trey Stewart at Jacksonville State, and we see the run that they're currently going on as well in conference, undefeated at 5-0. But yeah, I think defensively that's been the struggle. I don't know how much credit I was going to give them after a game like that because Liberty had been playing to their competition all season long. But the offense is kind of an area that I was disappointed with because of the way that they started the game. They didn't score the first drive, but they quickly got a turnover and then capitalized on that drive to get a 7-0 lead. And then in the second half, your first drive out, you drive down the field and you put up points as well. So obviously the ability is there for this offense to run whatever it is that Bodie Reeder is trying to run. And we saw some adjustments there. And I addressed that with Coach Mason in the post-game presser was it looked like you are making adjustments. They ran 21 personnel, something we haven't seen them run very much this year, but those first two drives were almost exclusively out of the 21 personnel package. And finding ways to get Jaquil Middlebrooks the ball in open space worked tremendously for them. Terry Wilkins had a few catches out of the 21 personnel as well. So there's some promising signs, and I know a lot of fans may be upset with the results on the field, but just know that Bodie Reeder generally is pretty much handcuffed with the way the offensive line is, with the amount of injuries that they're having to sustain, the vertical passing threat that we've seen from him at his previous stops like North Texas and Oklahoma State. Is just not capable of doing that right now with the amount of injuries that have piled up on the offensive line. So that was one of my big takeaways was the offense looks like they're making some changes, and obviously we saw some promise there because Liberty does have a pretty solid defensive front. So they were able to get two drives that went the distance. You found your way to the end zone. But then my other takeaway is special teams. And when we listened to Sam later, he probably is more on the side of they're just they just happenstance. And in fact, of like the game earlier this year, I believe it was Kennesaw State where we had 3 procedural penalties on a punt formation. That situation, all that happened at one time, and it was just that the officiating crew had a different interpretation of that rule, and we were disadvantaged by it. And then this one in particular was just a young guy who just made a poor decision, lined up over center when you can't do that. You can't line up over center in a punt formation. But the special teams in general, though, when you look at how Zeke Rakin has performed this year, obviously Grant Chadwick is one of the best punters in the country, and Brody Butler, who's an all-conference long snapper. Those three in particular on the special teams have been spectacular. So I don't want to put them down, but there's some procedural stuff that comes with discipline, as Mason already touched on in his post game. But all that to be said, I want to turn the attention to the end of the year now. We got 2 games left. The bowl picture is entirely out of the question now that the best you could do is 5 wins. Going into the year to kind of to bring it back up that topic, as you said, you were looking at 3 to 4 wins. I was on the more optimistic side. I said they'd get to 4 to 5. I said they could even find a way to 6 because I thought they would win the Louisiana Tech game. And you look back at that, man, if they were able to pull off the Louisiana Tech win in that situation, then you are at 6 wins. So New Mexico State coming up in 2 weeks, got a bye coming up, and then you end the year at FIU, who it doesn't look like they'll be playing for a bowl game either. So now you're in a situation where you can get to 5 wins. And in my opinion, if you can get to 5 wins, 1 year removed from a 4-win Stockstill team, and I think everyone here in this interview, as well as anyone that's listening to this, would agree, Stockstill's team last year was far more talented than this team that Mason has now. So I think it says a lot about what Mason and his staff have been able to do to just get to 5 wins, albeit an even easier non-conference schedule than what Stockstill had to deal with last year. So all that to say, moving forward, Jonathan, what are some things that you are looking forward to seeing in these last 2 ball games?
Yeah, so I think that this is a chance, 2 games left in the season. I think this is a chance that you're going to give some young guys a start, or at least you're going to let them get playing time. They haven't used their red shirt. Guess what? You're not going to lose it, playing now. Lance Peoples, the freshman from Cascade, I would absolutely love to see him get some minutes on the O-line. I mean, he's a big dude. He was at Coach Mason's introductory press conference. Like, I watched him play a couple of different high school games over the years, and the kid's phenomenal. Like, and he's just a good dude. Like, I would love to see him get some time, but the way I look at it is, what's the worst that can happen? Bowl season's out of reach, but you're going to give your young guys a lot of valuable experience playing against 2 programs that are in similar boats to you. Like you said, New Mexico State, they're 2-7 on the season. Well, guess what? They play Texas A&M at Texas A&M this upcoming Saturday. That's an insanely wild trip to make, this late in the season. And honestly, I think it could bang up their team just a little bit just SEC ball is different. As we know, playing Ole Miss, playing Alabama last year, like, guys get beat up, they get hurt. Their quarterback play, it hasn't been very good. They've swapped between two different quarterbacks. I believe their names are Parker. I don't want to say it wrong, but we'll say Parker Awad, I want to say, and Santino Marucci. They each have 93 attempts, but they haven't hit 1,000 yards yet on the season, passing wise. And they only have 7 touchdowns. Like, I think that you have to capitalize on that. But then the problem comes up, their run game, which I have a couple little stats I topped up here, and that's why I keep looking up. Their run game it's scary. And as you know, we're not the best at stopping the run, but, their starting back's name is Seth McGowan. I've seen him play a couple times this year on TV. He has 120 attempts on 636 yards, I believe. He has 3 touchdowns on the year. And Mike Washington has 107 attempts for almost 550 yards. As we talked about earlier, we've struggled at stopping the run this year. That's been all season. The defensive line is going to have to play lights out. Your linebackers are going to have to play lights out if they want to stop the run against the Aggies. The game's going to come down, in my opinion, to whichever team holds the other's offense to less points. That's just how I look at New Mexico State. I think it's winnable. However, we have to stop the run. You're going to have to throw some crazy plays out there, something innovative, something fun. Like, you're going to have to get the ball down the field and score, which we don't have a problem getting the ball down the field. As long as Amari's there, you have Holden, don't have a problem getting the ball down the field, but when you get to the end zone, when you get to the red zone, you have to be more efficient in the red zone, which we've struggled with at times this season. But honestly, that's the only glaring takeaway from New Mexico State's just their run game. Like, they're good. I think that, like I said, defensive line is going to have to play lights out if you want to win that game. FIU, exact opposite. Keon Jenkins, their starting quarterback, has 14 touchdowns on the year and 1,776 passing yards. That's a tale of 2 completely different teams, in the ways that they like to do it. His go-to receiver, Eric Rivers, 8 touchdowns on 876 yards. That's crazy. Even at the G6 level, whatever you want to call it, it's the secondary is going to have their work cut out for him. Xavier Williams is going to have to continue to be the guy he is. I can imagine it's hard switching from quarterback to safety. Midway through the season. I can imagine it's difficult. I luckily never had to do it. I wasn't fast enough or skinny enough to be any kind of skill player like that. So congrats to him for doing that. But also, John House the Fourth, by the way, favorite name ever. He every time they call his name, I smile. But yeah, so like, they're both going to have to play really, really well. Like I said, lights out. And another thing that we'll have to work on, the offensive line. I said I wanted to get young players in. I still want that to happen. However, you're still going to have to find that balance between your vets and your red shirts, your new guys, because the Panther defense has 13 sacks on the year and 9 interceptions. Believe we gave up 5 sacks against Liberty. Our offensive lines constantly had to change this year due to injury and whatnot. And I think that at that point, I think it's going to be a struggle. They're going to have to work harder than they have in the last few weeks to keep Nick upright. Thank God he hasn't gotten hurt yet. He hasn't had to sit out yet, but you have to step up and something has to change. I understand I understand the youth. I understand the injuries, but, at some point you have to look at it as, why are so many guys getting injured at the level they are? Amari Kelly being out for Liberty. What happened? You find out 10 minutes before the game starts, 30 minutes before the game starts, that he's out. What happened? Is it the training regime? Is it something that they're just not used to, that they're getting their bodies used to this style of play? Barring some unforeseen circumstances, I think we can win both games. Like I said, against New Mexico State, you just have to stop the run And then on the exact opposite, you're going to have to be able to stop the pass against FIU.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more when it comes to the diagnosis of those two teams. NMSU, for one thing in particular, is they're just really young, dealing with the same situation that we kind of dealt with where Jerry Kill decided to call off his career and took everyone, including Diego Pavia, to Vanderbilt. And so they're having to JUCO build their entire roster this season, and they've definitely had their struggles. But yeah, I agree. Stopping the run to them will be paramount to getting a win there. Nothing really about NMSU necessarily scares me. I do think from a front standpoint that we could be okay against the run. But New Mexico State has had their games where they have shootouts, and then they also have their games where they can't score a single point. And we've seen both sides of that from New Mexico State. But one thing has been ultimately true, them being so inexperienced at this level, they haven't been necessarily able to finish those games. And I do think you give us the edge being at home with veterans that have won some games recently, all things to be considered, where you have won 2 of the last 4. Something that New Mexico State has not done. So that's something that I think points promising there. And then FIU, as you said, Keon Jenkins is probably one of the best sophomore quarterbacks in the entire country, definitely in Conference USA this year. And he is the mobile archetype that we've described all year has been the biggest problem for MTSU. Like we talked about Tyler Huff at Jacksonville State. We talked about TJ Finley, who went down, but Caden Velkamp is just mobile enough. You got Caden Salter this last week, who's just mobile enough. That gives us problems. Keon Jenkins is quite the improviser, which is what has made him such a great quarterback this year. And Eric Rivers, who leads Conference USA in receiving, took that title from Amari Kelly, with him being pretty much limited these last 2 weeks. That's a good duo there in Miami, but it's all about what team decides to show up when we go down to Miami at the end of the year. And again, it may be fortunately or unfortunately, neither team will be playing for a bowl game. So you're kind of battling for a team that's trying to get to 5 wins. Coach McIntyre is in his 3rd season, didn't have the season that they were expecting to have. So I'm almost certain he's feeling that he needs to win this game in order to just kind of feel a little bit more comfortable or more confident in his job security moving forward, as I'm sure he's going into a contract year in year 4. But Mason probably doesn't have that same level of an administration staring down his neck like Coach McIntyre is. However, I still know that he would like to get to 5 wins, and that's something that, again, would be an improvement from where this program was a season ago. So I look forward to those 2 games. Again, that's in 2 weeks where they play New Mexico State at home. It's a 1:30 kickoff. But before we finish up here, basketball, real quickly, Hoop started this last week. Men's basketball looked very impressive in their road win on Saturday against Abilene Christian. And then obviously the women, you were there at the Grand Canyon game on Friday night. What a grinded out win for the Lady Raiders. But more importantly, in tonight's matchup, they play Tennessee. Jonathan, what are you expecting from the ladies tonight?
As we all know, Rick, Enzel, and Matt, they have a history of coaching really tough teams. They've beaten multiple Power 4 opponents over the years, whether that's at home, away, neutral sites, whatever. Louisville, TCU, I believe. They've beaten Kentucky, beaten Vanderbilt, beat Tennessee last year. Nearly beat LSU last year in the tournament, by the way. Really fun atmosphere that LSU puts out, especially for women's basketball. Like you absolutely love to see it. But Grand Canyon, they came in and they gave Middle a really good fight. They came in, they played tough. They were, Jalen was on the ground more times than I can count. Tamia Scott was getting roughed up constantly. Courtney Blakely had somebody on her at all times. It's just Grand Canyon put up the fight that Middle needs, especially going into this style of non-conference play they have, playing Tennessee tonight, of course, Tennessee, they're really well coached. Coach Caldwell, phenomenal hire, I believe. She brought in a really, really, really good transfer class, and her recruiting class was pretty solid too, given the short time frame that she had. Albeit their 2 wins this season are over teams that they were supposed to beat pretty handily. I think Middle's going to be one of the better defensive teams they play all season. I think that I believe it was yesterday off to go watch the football game, but they were back in the gym today. Then they'll be back in the gym tomorrow. They're either travel up tomorrow night or Tuesday. And honestly, I think Middle Tennessee comes out with a win. Food City Arena, I believe is what it's called now, but the old Thompson Boiling, it's it's a really tough place to play. I've seen plenty of games there growing up a Tennessee fan, but it's just exciting, and I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's going to be whichever team scores more points in the end. Basically, Tennessee's going to come to play because, well, Little Middle doesn't need to beat them 2 years in a row. But also, Middle Tennessee's going to go in with that chip on their shoulder of, hey, we get this win, that's a better chance that we're ranked going into next week. So honestly, if I were the Lady Raiders, I would have that little bit of a chip on my shoulder for only receiving 3 votes in the AP poll yesterday.
Yeah, well, we heard it from Rick in his post game after the Grand Canyon game. He thinks that Tennessee is already overlooking MTSU this early in the year, and I think it plays to our benefit to play them this early because Kim Caldwell, in her first season in Knoxville, having to kind of figure some things out. But they've steamrolled their first 2 opponents as they should. But I don't know how true what Rick says is that Tennessee's not watching any film on MTSU. I think they would be silly to do that considering they did lose at a neutral floor last year. But I assure you that they have plenty of bulletin board material that he has given his team, and they know the importance of winning a game like this. And hats off to Tennessee for canceling this contract, because with the coaching change, they very easily could have bought themselves out of this. So I'm very thankful that they didn't. And with that, they come back to the Murphy Center next year, which will be a great atmosphere. But of course, the game is tonight. It tips off at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 5:30 Central Time, so don't miss that. If you're not making the trip up there to Knoxville this evening, shame on you. But if you're going to watch, tune in on the SEC Network, as again, that tips off at 5:30 local Central Time tonight. Jonathan House from Sideline Sports, MTSU's affiliate. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Give the people a little shout out about your social media, the handles, kind of the stuff you, and I'll of course shout out Drake Williams, your writer that we've got to know this fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Drake and I've been friends for a long time. He worked with the Sidelines account when he lived in Carbondale for Southern Illinois for a bit, but over the summer he moved back down here. Thank God I have some help. Last couple of years it's been just me, but super excited to have it going and super excited that Drake's back. Give him a follow. I retweet all of his stuff on football game days and try to add videos to it from the sidelines. But speaking of the social media accounts, if you want, guys, go to Twitter, follow SSN_MTSU. That's going to be the best way to get to follow us, as well as follow Drake's personal profile too. I don't have my own personal profile anymore. I'm in the current stages of rebuilding one from scratch. But Jake, thanks so much for having me on, bud. Appreciate it.
Did you know the Blue Raider podcast has an online store? You can now support your favorite podcast by checking out our selection at our website, blueraiderpodcast.com. And stay tuned for new merchandise releases as we collaborate with athletes in NIL partnerships.
We are joined now by our favorite beat and only beat writer that is within the GoBlueRaiders.com and MTSU Athletic Communications base. That is Sam Doughton. Sam, welcome back.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And the reason I always bring you on is because of your plethora of knowledge within the MTSU athletic department and so many topics that I like to discuss at this episode in particular, because we're making that turn from the fall season coming to a close. You got football and volleyball that are still playing. And then you got your fall seasons for your spring sports just wrapped up, and we're moving into winter and basketball. So we'll be able to touch base on all those things in today's episode. But first, kind of the topic at hand we just discussed with Jonathan House was about football. A disappointing showing as you had the opportunity to keep your bowl game hopes alive with a win against Liberty this week. You came out strong, but ultimately you faltered there late in the first quarter. It was still a game in the second half, but albeit it's still a 20-point loss. So there's so much to really to talk about, and really I think we'd be echoing the same sentiment that you and I have been sharing all season long, that this team just isn't quite ready for that. And of course you had the opportunity to kind of maybe right that ship, but albeit they're just not there. This is still potentially a 5-win team, as I had predicted early in the year. And when you were able to get some comments from these guys, players and coaches alike there at the press conference, what is the emotion like within the locker room after Saturday's loss?
Well, I think it was very forward-looking. The two guys we talked to, Hayes Sutton and Brandon Buckner, talked about finishing strong and going out on a good note. And, you and I both agree that they have an opportunity to win these last two games, coming up here in a couple of weeks at home against New Mexico State on Senior Day, then end of the season, Thanksgiving weekend in Miami at FIU. Two winnable games for the teams, given, the track record of the two teams they're playing. But, like as Derek Mason likes to say, your tape is your resume. And, we've got 10 games of resume tape for this team right now. And it just shows that they're not quite there yet. Derek Mason said the Blue Raiders have to be better. And I think there's outside of Grant Chadwick's punting, I'm not sure there's an area where they couldn't have been better necessarily on Saturday. Obviously, Liberty had a lot of success running the ball. It's been a consistent theme. A little bit different when you got that triple option look, a little bit trickier. But that's something that they knew was coming. It's what Coach Chadwell at Liberty is probably known best for across his college career as well. So obviously disappointing, particularly the way that just sort of that game worked out. You had a couple breaks didn't go your way in critical spots that could have made it a little bit tighter game at different points in time. But it's a young team. They're playing a lot of young players, and I'm super curious, sort of what lessons they've learned from year one. And what they're going to look to maybe change in the offseason looking forward, from after they've had sort of 1 year under their belts here in Murfreesboro.
Right. And there's so much I think that we'll learn about this team in these last two games, especially when you talk about the whole red shirt thing. I thought we'd see a few more bodies on Saturday because, as we've already talked about, when you get 4 games that you can remain your red shirt, postseason included, and so we thought maybe we'd see some of these new fresh faces. You get that rotating offensive line, maybe some new guys roll in there. But as far as bodies or players that we haven't necessarily seen, we know we saw Brody Benke get in, we saw Drew Francis get in on Saturday, which I thought was interesting because I don't know that he has another year of eligibility regardless. But anyone in particular that maybe you have some insight for us about we could expect to maybe see get a few more snaps in these last couple of games?
Well, I think a lot of the freshmen that, would get chances in a more normal year has probably already been playing, particularly on the offensive line. A guy like Zach Clayton, at the start of the year, I think they probably didn't think was going to play more than 4 games. But sort of injuries have forced him to step up. And, he's done some good things, with that opportunity and has grown with each week at the position that they've rotated through a couple different spots on the offensive line, trying to find the best spot for him. So, it's unfortunate, but a lot of, Marion Bailey's another guy they talk a lot about. Aiden Butts has been a defensive lineman that I've been impressed with. That's coming in as a true freshman. So, it's all about managing the numbers if they want to keep the red shirt on them right now. But I think you see most of the guys they think are going to be, potential major contributors going forward, at least right now. Obviously, guys can make jumps in the offseason weight program. And, you did see a couple younger guys sort of get in towards the end of the game, sort of as rotational pieces. But I think they're evaluating what they currently have with guys they think can make an impact next year. And a lot of those guys have already seen the field at least a little bit already this season.
All right. Well, let's turn our attention now to the big first opening week for basketball, both men's and women. They are winners 2-0 coming into this week. The ladies play tonight in Knoxville against Tennessee. A lot of eyes and attention are turned there. So let's go ahead and talk about the Lady Raiders. I said all preseason they're going to have a tough schedule. And Northern Kentucky, I think for the most part, they made that game look relatively easy as it should, winning a road game nonetheless. And we've seen in years past that Insul's teams have always found one road game that they should win, giving them trouble. If you look 2 years ago, they lost at Mercer in their opening game. Last year, it was a road contest at SIU Edwardsville that, albeit they came out victorious, but it was a close one for 3 quarters there. But the Northern Kentucky game, that was not the game this year, thankfully. So they looked good all around. And then on Friday night against Grand Canyon, what a game that was. I think if you were in the Murphy Center, I know that it was the opening weekend for high school playoffs, so some might have missed that game, but what a matchup that was. I had said all year long Grand Canyon is going to be a good team. That's a very good net win to have 10 points on at home against what I believe to be the WAC champion at the end of the year. So in my opinion, a tournament team. They threw a lot at us, and I think if we're going to tie this into the game tonight against Tennessee, I put over at gomiddle.com, over on our Rivals affiliate site, that I think the Grand Canyon game was almost like a diet Tennessee, if you will. They run kind of this mayhem defense, suffocating man-to-man defense that created a lot of problems for us. We had a lot of turnovers, but ultimately our defense is what prevailed us, not the offense. To me, Scott turned it on in the second half. Very impressed with her and who she's been for this team so far. But Sam, I was impressed with the way they grinded that one out on Friday night, and I feel pretty good about what could come to fruition tonight.
No question, Jake. It's a game that gives you a lot of confidence. Grand Canyon was one of the 5 losses that Middle Tennessee had a season ago. And, it was a game that the coaching staff, told me that was very physical last year in Phoenix. And maybe that was not something that they saw on tape when they went out to Arizona to play Grand Canyon a year ago. But they knew it was going to happen now. And so they had the team prep for it. As you mentioned, they sort of, at least in the first half, try to do what we think Tennessee's going to do, which is play a ton of players, get fresh bodies out there, give them different looks, press a lot, try to get into Middle's legs, which obviously, a team that runs a little bit of a shorter bench. And, didn't really work for Grand Canyon because everybody seemed to get in foul trouble. Seems like they weren't able to play as physical as maybe they were expecting to without getting, punished for it on the foul sheet, sending Middle Tennessee to the line. But, still had some success early. I think Grand Canyon was very strong defensively, particularly in that first half. And it took sort of a little mini run right there, right before halftime for Middle to claw their way back into the game. And then the second half, it was all Middle Tennessee. They found the formula that worked on offense, which was basically, hey, give Tamia Scout the ball and screen her to go right. And usually good things will happen somewhere on the court. Had some success with that, got in transition a lot, cleaned up on the glass, got Anastasia Boldreva involved. And came out with a very clean win against a really good opponent. And, you mentioned the defense, sort of the sidebar I wrote after the game was about Jalen Gregory guarding Trinity San Antonio, who, I didn't know this going into the game, but played a lot for Puerto Rico in the Olympics this summer. Averaged 7 points a game for the national team. And Puerto Rico, they lost all 3 of their games in Paris, but only lost 2 of those games by 1 point. So a very competitive team on the international scene. And Trinity was a big part of that as sort of that team's point guard off the bench. And she was completely shut down by Jalen all night. 2 points, 7 turnovers. That was a big key to why this team is successful. And it's good. That level of defense, that level of intensity, but particularly the starting 5, is going to be key this week in Tennessee. You sat in the room with me, Jake, when Rick sort of gave his post-game comments about he's not even sure that Tennessee is going to bother scouting Middle Tennessee, how they seem pretty confident. And, Tennessee is, boat raced 2 teams, to start the year. 2 teams that are not near Middle's level, to be fair, but still, when you're beating teams by 40 and 50 like Tennessee has, hard not to be confident in what you've got going. They're a team that wave subs a lot. They press all game. Coach Kim Caldwell's system is very unique and, it's a challenge to deal with, but it's something I know that Middle Tennessee's been prepping for, as far back as September, working on breaking the press and doing that. They spend time with almost every practice doing that. So not a matchup that they're going to be unprepared for, even with the quick turnaround. But I'm excited for tonight's game in Knoxville. I think it'll be a really great environment. And, hopefully Middle Tennessee can continue the momentum that they got last year with the win over the Lady Vols.
And I thought going into midway through the Grand Canyon game, we were down. Well, we were up, and then we were down because they counted a 3-point shot before halftime. We were down at halftime, and I thought to myself, I said, maybe this isn't the win that we need, but it might be the loss that we need going into Tennessee. Because if you look at the stat line in particular for the Grand Canyon game, you touched on Jalen. I mean, we'll maybe talk about her here in just a second, but the 3-point shooting, 1 of 10, and the one you hit was a corner 3 at the buzzer before halftime with Anastasia. So an unlikely candidate to hit the 1-3. You're out rebounded 39-32 against a team that, again, on paper is smaller than you are. Now, I will give my hats off to their post play. I've already blanked on her name from Grand Canyon, but she did a great job with Boldreva and Enrique alike. So, again, a lot of those things you've got to shore up for a game like Tennessee. So again, maybe that was the game that we needed with Grand Canyon to be able to fix some of those things that you need to be fixed. When you talk about the Tennessee and Kim Caldwell's system, I'm very skeptical of this, or I should say, I'm very suspicious of her system and how it's going to work at the SEC level, because her time at Marshall, for those that don't know, it's very similar to the Grinnell offense, which is go down, shoot the ball as quickly as you possibly can. Ideally, it's going to be a 3-pointer, and then you're going to run a full court press after every single make. You're going to run the platoon method, which is a 5-in, 5-out system. You're just consistently subbing, keeping legs fresh all the time, and it's very hard to kind of pinpoint a star. And I say that might struggle at the SEC level because where that system fails, or I say fails, but where that system does have its issues is the rebounding. You limit the second chance opportunities, and of course, if you're not getting turnovers, that team can't get into transition offense, which creates easy buckets. Which, as I said again on Go Middle, was that system in general. They thrive on chaos, on mayhem, and that's what they're trying to do with the speed that they play with. And obviously, I'm not going to spend time talking about how that'll translate to the SEC, because they're going to have their own battles playing teams like South Carolina this year. But how does that fare against teams like MTSU? Well, at Marshall, it fared very well. She won the Sun Belt Conference Championship last year. So when you play teams like us, or play teams that are smaller than, say, like South Carolina, it tends to work pretty well because your bench is a lot deeper. You talk about winning the rebounding battle, getting those second chance opportunities. It tends to fare very well. So to throw this back on MTSU and where I think that this team will be successful is, as you already said, Grand Canyon tried to run us to death on Friday night, and it still didn't work. We were able to keep our legs fresh. Players like Jalen, when the shots aren't falling, she's going to continue to defend hard because she knows she still has to play two ways, and then she's excellent at that. Eight fouls drawn. Same for Tamia. She had 8 fouls drawn on Friday night. So it's stuff like that I think makes this team so much different than any other mid-major that she may have played against at Marshall. I know how successful she was at Division II level, but how does that system fare well? Well, the only team that she played 2 games inside the top in Quad 1, as we like to call it, for the NCAA tournament last year at Marshall. Her opening game against George Mason, in which she lost at home, and then she also lost her first round game of the NCAA tournament against Virginia Tech, which was a blowout. So again, I'm not saying that obviously that's going to translate to this year directly. She's going to lose every Quad 1 game, I'm sure, because her talent is increased from what she had at Marshall. But I'm going to be interested to see how that system works at the SEC level, and I'm going to be interested to see how it works against MTSU, because we haven't faced a team, one that's probably this athletic, that's this talented, and running that same high-powered, high-octane offense / full-court pressing defense. So a lot to be seen this evening. But Sam, I'll throw this back to you as we wrap up the women's basketball talk. I know it was a long-winded rant by myself. I've been excited to really talk about this game for so many reasons. But what are you hoping to see out of this team, other than a win? What are you hoping to see from this team tonight?
Well, Rick's a coach that, as we know, likes to keep the bench short as much as he can. Alina Enrique in particular, is a player that played 25 to 27 minutes at UTEP and a little bit less than that at Texas Tech. She's already played careers highs in minutes, for her first 2 games that have counted here at Middle Tennessee, broke it both times. And, if Rick has his way, I'm sure she'll play all 40 tonight in Knoxville. So, I want to see the team keep some players out of foul trouble. They did a pretty good job of that against Grand Canyon. Boldreva was really the only one that they got in trouble. Obviously, she fouled out eventually. But if you can keep Boldreva, out of the foul count, you can run with the starting 5, as much as you can. And I still like our starting 5, even against those wave subs, because Courtney Blakely's going to be able to break the press. She was able to break the press a lot against Grand Canyon when they did press. And, she has some other help in Tamia Scott and Jalen Gregory to get the ball up the court in those situations. So, I'm sure they'll get a few, cheap turnovers. Teams that press as much as they do always get a couple every game. You just sort of got to, recognize that and live with it as best you can. But if they're able to consistently break the press, I'm confident that we'll have the advantage in the half court, at least for a little bit until they sort of get adjusted to it. So you got to make your hay early. And, they hit some outside shots and are able to defend at the level they did on Friday night. Should be a very exciting game on the road in Thompson Bowles Arena.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, you got to get tickets, get up there. The Lady Raiders always have a great contingency, but TBA is going to be its own atmosphere that you're going to have to contend with as well. So if you haven't already, make plans to get up there, be loud, be blue as always. So let's turn it over to the men's side. What a week it was for them as well. You have the Education Day, which I want to send my condolences to you, Sam, and those that were there for that game on Monday amidst the thousands of screaming kids, but for good reason. Big win for the men. Very exciting about that. But really, the game I really want to talk about was the Saturday game in Abilene, Texas against Abilene Christian, 79-56 win there. I've said my piece all off season about what this team can be, and I want to say it came to fruition on Friday or on Saturday. But don't let me don't let me sway it too much. It is just one game, and that was a team that they should be beating. But to win by 23 points, a team that is notoriously bad on the road, that was a lot of promising signs. And I thought to myself when the game started, the first 4 possessions were the worst possessions you possibly could have had. They very quickly went down 8-0, and I thought, here we go again. It just doesn't matter. But the one thing that I want to commend this team for, as well as what we've seen in years past, is that the teams in the past I felt like would have folded in that situation. They got down quickly, could have very easily shipped it in, and that would have been a long 39 minutes for the rest of the night. But they kept to it. They quickly flipped the scoreboard on Abilene and then practically ran away from it from about the 8-minute mark in the first half. Didn't really see it go back under single digits. Well, it did very, very shortly there after halftime. But again, went on another short run and put them away pretty soundly. Very impressed with them. Justin Porter, 24 points. But there's so much I could talk about all these guys. But the one piece that I really took away from this game was early on the turnovers. Cam got a little lazy. Cam had a few defensive breakdowns himself, and immediately we see Jalen Counter go in the game, and it's like a flip switched. And what a shot in the arm Jalen Counter is to that offense. And really that's kind of what you needed. And we talk about what happened last year. Like, you didn't have the Jalen Counter on the bench to do just that. And I love that there's someone there now to really challenge Cam Weston. So Sam, what were kind of your takeaways from that game on Saturday?
Well, one thing that's always been true about Nick McDevitt ever since I've been here is that he is quick with that timeout if he thinks there needs to be a momentum stopper. And he called that timeout as quick as I've ever seen him called after, ACU got, 6 points and, not even 2 minutes to take a 6-0 lead. But he coupled that with, as you said, bringing in Jalen Counter, who actually subbed in for Kamari. And then he also brought in Chris Liu for Issam Mustafa. And one thing we were talking about sort of before we started recording was that, they have a changeup off the bench now, that they can offer a different look lineup wise than they were able to offer, in their starting lineup. Obviously, the 3-guard lineup with Weston, Porter, and Counter all on the floor is very tough to guard. It is, most teams have one really good, sort of ball dominant defensive stopper. Maybe you've got 2 if you're really talented defensively. Almost nobody has 3 that can keep in front of 3 guys that can get down to the rim the way that Jalen and Justin and Cam can, as well as, keep with them on the perimeter because they're all good shooters from the outside as well. That's just really tough to deal with. And obviously you give up a little size rebounding wise when you do that, but depending on who else is in with them, it might not be that big a deal. If Torrey Alston and Issam Mustafa are in with that group of 3, that's a lot of size and length that can get the boards and get the ball back out to them again to run something else on the offensive glass. So they started making that comeback with Buford sort of in the 4 instead of Alston in that situation, who's another guy that's got some size and some rebounding ability. But they just have options. If they can go to the hot hand each and every night, it doesn't all have to be on one person like it was on Justin Porter a lot of last year. It's just they have a lot of offensive talent in a lot of different places. Issam sort of ate the ACU center's lunch a couple times. I think he had 14 points and 7 rebounds, 5 of which were offensive rebounds. So that tells you how active he was on the offensive end. They just looked really dominant in that game. And, I don't think ACU is maybe a team that's going to finish the year particularly strongly, given what we saw, as often as they turned the ball over last night. But, it gives you some good encouragement, culture-wise, how they were able to respond, which is what you should expect from a team with as many veterans as this group has this season. They should be able to respond. They've been there before. They've been down before, and they know that they can come back. And, boy, did they hit the gas pedal last night. And, it was a really fun evening for me watching that. Recording this on Sunday night, fun fact. But watching that Saturday night was really, really fun and very exciting. I'm encouraged to see, and, I get a chance to see him twice this week at home. And so I think that's going to be fun on Wednesday night against Evansville and then Saturday against Murray State.
Yeah, this week is going to be another good week of basketball. The Evansville game on Wednesday night, again, another opponent that I feel comfortable that they should beat pretty soundly. And my understanding is they're going to do some sort of or not necessarily an anniversary, but a commemoration for the Evansville flight. I believe it was in the 70s that crashed on its way to Murfreesboro, where the entire Evansville team was on board of that plane. And then Saturday is another matchup that I think when you circle the date as far as big games, this non-conference schedule, the Murray State game, always a good competition between Murray State. They're expected to be a good opponent in the Missouri Valley this year, but you get them at home at 3 p.m. on Saturday. that's a game, again, I look forward to see how they look there against a team that is historically very good, but also that's your last game before you go into the Myrtle Beach Invitational, where you play Ohio in your first matchup that following week. So there's a lot to still see what this team can do. There was a lot of, I want to say, interchangeable lineups that we're still seeing him roll out on a nightly basis, which I still think is good. It feels like there's no one's position is necessarily comfortable. No one's locked into their spot because, again, when things went south there early, you saw Chris Loof go right in immediately. You saw Jalen Counter go in right immediately. So again, to echo your sentiment on the ability to have a change up off the bench, we're still going to see a lot of that through this early going. And right now, I feel so good about this team, but a lot to look forward to. But again, if I can't encourage anyone enough, be there on Saturday for that Murray State game, because again, this team looks good, and I hate for you to miss it, anticipating that this is the same old team that you've been experiencing the last year. This is a very new team. And I'm excited about it. So this week in particular, Sam, and throw it back on you about the Myrtle Beach Invitational, because they're going to play a lot of good teams down there in Myrtle Beach, especially if they beat Ohio in that first one, which might even be one of the tougher teams down there. But when you talk about what you're looking to see in these next coming weeks for this basketball team, are there areas of improvement that you still think that they need to shore up as they start to face stiffer competition?
Well, you always, this has been a recurring theme of the New McDevitt era at Middle Tennessee, but they're still a little too turnover prone for my liking. Certainly we're better with that, than they have been. Won the turnover battle, like we mentioned on Saturday, but you would like to see a little more ball care, a little more ball security, always a good thing to emphasize and get them extra possessions. But I mean, really, they're doing a lot of things well right now. They're really defending as a team. I think you're seeing a lot more help side, sort of rotation and recovery than you've seen from them in a long time. And that's partially because, like you said, nobody's position secured. So I'm sure that they internally feel like they got to go all out all the time, every single minute they're in. And when you have guys on the bench that can spell you too, that encourages you to use that extra energy as well. I'm curious if they press as much as they did. That was a big part of the program. Like my first year here, which was that 21-22 season, was how often they press. I think it'd be interesting to see them press a little more. Might be something that they start to bring in against maybe some teams that are a little bit better on their schedule as sort of, an equalizer, a way to get some easy buckets in transition if they're able to get a couple of those turnovers. I think one player I would like to see, step up in ways, Kamari Lands, who we haven't seen his sort of offensive production, just through 2 games, not a huge deal. He's doing some other good things on the court when he's out there. But if he gets a game where he gets hot from outside and shows some of that outside shooting ability that we know he has, I think you can feel pretty confident about this team's, going forward.
Yeah, Lance, I'm glad you bring him up. He's kind of the one piece that I think that hasn't quite found it yet, but we know he's capable of scoring in bunches, as I've seen at practice before. So I'm excited to see him kind of find his stroke, because, again, it would just bring another level to this offense and really stretch the floor. And same with Justin Buford. He's a guy that I was very critical of last year because he kind of lost his 3-point shot compared to his sophomore season. So another guy that 0 for 2 on Saturday, but as he's obviously a starter, he's a part of this lineup. You'd like to see that production kind of re-enter into his tool belt. But let's move things over back to our fall sports as those seasons are starting to wind down. The one in particular right now that just wrapped up was soccer this last weekend. They went to the Conference USA tournament for the first time. I believe it's in 3 seasons that they've done so. But they make it all the way to the semifinals with a penalty kick win against Sam Houston. And then they lost to the host and then eventual Conference USA champions FIU Lady Golden Panthers by a score of 2-0 on Friday night. So I think going there, first of all, making it there this year was impressive, albeit with the roster that he had. He had some injuries early on in the year with Emma Pedersen, but making it there was accomplishment number one, and then winning a game there against Sam Houston, who had some pretty good wins on their resume as well, was promising. And then FIU, you drop a 2-0 one, better than the 4-1 loss you had early at the very beginning of the season against them in conference play. But I think there's some promising things with this team. I think you're going to return a lot of these key pieces like Lexi Dindis, like Menon Labarge. There's plenty more to name that I'm maybe not thinking of at the top right now, but those 2 in particular, I would be excited about returning next year. So as you turn the page into next year and we look back at what this season was. I think it was a successful year, but they're just short. Like I made the joke the other night. If games were just 80 minutes, they might be one of the best teams in Conference USA. But to those last 10, they just seem to kind of fold. So I look forward again to what this team can bring next year as they bring back that experience, because continuity, just like any sport at college, is going to be prime for their success next year.
Yeah, 6 players made the all CUSA team. You had 2 players make, all freshmen. Lexi Dindis won freshman of the year, and Manon Labarge was the all CUSA midfielder of the year as well. So, I mean, that shows you the level of player that they brought in and the level of production that they've gotten from certain spots as well. But, this team is a pretty young team. They only honored 2 players on senior night and had 1 other player that's a graduate player that's exhausted her eligibility, Lauren Spanster, who was one of those all-conference players, at left back. So they're bringing a lot of players back that gives them a good core to build around. One thing I mentioned to Aston Roden is I really thought that this is one of the better coaching jobs I've seen a coach do in season. When Pedersen went down, having the type of player she was for the tactics that Aston likes to run. It's a very challenging player to replace when you sort of have a hold up player at the 9 at striker that can set up the wings like Cavalli and Dindis that have had good years for him, and moving Manon up front and having the midfield depth behind her to sort of be able to play Manon as a bit of a false 9. Showed a lot of creativity. Showed some good depth on the roster side. And really was the big key for the run they sort of went in the middle of conference play that set them up to make the tournament. Where I think they won, 3 or 4 home games in a row in conference play, which was the key thing, getting those 3 points on those weekends at a big weekend where they beat Jack State and Kennesaw back to back, got 6 points from there. And that sort of set them on a good trajectory the rest of the way. So a lot of work to do in the offseason. I think, watching the conference tournament a little bit, you can see where they, could be a little more athletic at times in different areas. And so I'm curious, what they're, looking for this offseason, who they're looking to bring in, who they have already started recruiting, and sort of, what they feel there. Because it seems like they've got the system back in place that they think is going to be successful. And so how can you build on it from now? I think it's going to be the key for this program going forward.
Right. Another program that has their season coming to a close here recently is going to be volleyball. They've got one more matchup at home this weekend on Friday and Saturday against New Mexico State at the Alumni Memorial Gymnasium. Friday's at 6, Saturday is at 1, so don't miss that for Fan Appreciation Night Friday night. And then, of course, Senior Day is going to be there on Saturday at 1 p.m. For the ladies, my understanding is they are a lock for the conference tournament that's coming up. So, again, a step forward for them. They're in the middle right now at 8-8 in conference play. They need 2 more wins to kind of put them over. I had the standings in front of me, over Sam Houston right now, who they're unfortunately losing a tiebreaker to because they were swept by them earlier in the year. But they play New Mexico State, a team who is 10-6 in conference. So even a potential matchup for the tournament coming ahead. So for them, the support would be tremendous for them to pick up 2 wins, finish 10-8, a winning record in conference. Since our talk at the midway point of their season, things have kind of turned again for them. They've won quite a bit. They had a little bit of a streak there before they went to El Paso. They split with Kennesaw State this last week. And so again, another program relatively young. We know what Andy Spees is and how special she has been to that team. Audrey Rhoda has been another spectacular player. And then Lau Jansen has been, who we all thought she was going to be an all-around good player for them in the kills department, the digs department as a defensive specialist, and of course her aces this year. So Sam, quickly on the volleyball with their season coming to a close, and then their opportunity there in El Paso at the Conference USA Championships.
Well, I think the key for this volleyball team is that they've done a good job at home. I don't think they have not lost a conference game at home the whole year. Let me double check you on that. Let me go to the schedule on the tab I have. Yeah, they beat swept FIU at home, swept Jack State, swept La Tech, and they're going to play New Mexico State this weekend, who's by far the toughest team of the 4 host series. And as you notice, that they're missing one. They sort of got the short end of the stick and went on the road for 4 series. For 5 series instead of hosting 5 series this year. But we're able to get some splits on the road, particularly against Liberty, who I think is a team that most people expect to be towards the top of the conference standings and is up there at this point in time. So they've done some good things. As we sort of mentioned at the halfway point, they're playing some younger players. In certain spots, they've had some injuries, particularly at middle blocker, that have forced some lineup changes at different points in time. But they're continuing to grow, and I'm curious what they might do in the conference standings. Obviously, like there's a lot that can move sort of this last week here. If they're able to sweep New Mexico State, like get them to 10 wins in conference play, that would tie them, I believe, with New Mexico State in the standings. So then they would have a tiebreaker over them. And then you should be above Sam Houston as well. And depending on how Kennesaw does this last week, is in addition could jump up quite a bit in the standings, get yourself a favorable matchup in that first round, potentially move on to the semifinals. So that's going to be key for that program. See if they can get these last 2 wins at home this week. I think it's a New Mexico State team that's certainly very solid. And I think that'll tell you a lot about how this program's grown throughout the season. Is can they defend the AMG home court, against a quality team here at the end of the season?
Yeah, we look forward to that. And as we continue our discussion here on all of our fall sports, another one that had their Conference USA Championship just 2 weekends ago was the cross country team. The curse of even number years continues. For Coach Vroman, unfortunately, they fall just short of Liberty, who swept the men's and women's cross-country championships. But we did have freshmen Alan Kiplagat and then Odelia Jepchumba, who both were individual champions for the men and women, respectively, there. So a lot of promising things for them. But I think, again, you turn that attention towards the regional coming up for those two in particular. And of course, you look forward to the indoor season coming ahead for these distance runners because, of course, their season doesn't stop. But albeit an impressive year, especially for Kiplagat and Jepchumba.
Kiplagat was somebody who's in the University of Alabama program last year, and talking to Keith Roman about him, it was somebody that Alabama, didn't think was, a whole lot of, sort of when he left. That was one way that the middle was able to get in the conversation for him when he entered the portal, and now he, wins Conference USA his first season out. Shows you the level that Coach Roman is coaching at this point. He's got a system down to maximize what he's got, and came up just 2 points short on the men's side. I heard from people on the ground there that there was a moment where it looked like one Liberty runner might have been DQ'd, and so there was a brief second where like middle had jumped Liberty in the standings, but eventually there was just a glitch in the software, and the points got restored. So heartbreaking moment there, but really impressive run from Kiplagat and Jepchumba, as you said. Young runners doing that, setting those times early on in their careers. Only growth to go up from here, and I know that Coach Roman's excited about the distance runners he has coming in, in the years to come, and how, the players in the program will continue to develop. So excited for the indoor season. I know a lot of our sprinters and jumpers have been anxious to get their competition underway, get their, highlights on our social channels. So excited to learn more about them in the weeks to come, but good luck to our conference title winners as they go into individual competition in NCAA regionals. Big honor for them.
Yeah, that is coming up. I believe it's this weekend, the 15th, and they will be in Tallahassee, Florida. So, again, check back on next week's Raider Wrap-Up portion where we will be able to highlight a lot of that. But let's move it back over now to women's and men's tennis. They actually just wrapped up their fall schedules. Well, the women did, for that matter. They had their MTSU Invite, a very impressive weekend for the Lady Raiders in that regard, where they hosted Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, North Alabama. A lot of individual wins this fall. Pretty impressive for this team in general. I know that their newest addition is still coming off of an injury, so we didn't get to see her much, especially perform in doubles, which is where they're hoping that she will perform the best for that team. But I thought things looked good for them. And then on the men's side, again, particularly in the regionals, they've got their Masters Conference Championships coming up, or Conference Masters Championships for ITA coming up in Rome, Georgia. That's coming up this weekend, or currently taking place. I'm excited about really the individual championships that are coming up later this month, because now that NCAA has switched up how they're going to run their individual championships this year. So I know we've got a few that will be competing in that. But altogether, collectively, I thought it was a successful tennis fall. But I think I had more attention on the women's to see how that team would perform this year, returning a lot of talent. And again, hoping to kind of improve upon their season last year.
Yeah, Jake, it's always good to see these players get individual wins and doubles teams wins, sort of in these team competitions, they're not unserious. Let me say, like, they're still serious competition, but it's a little bit different environment than you have when you're having these sort of dual meets, these dual matches, in the winter and spring. So it's a lot more focused on personal development. Teams are trying different players in different situations. You're not running your full lineup of 6 most weekends. A lot of your players might be playing as an individual in different tournaments, particularly if they're international. So for me, at least, it's a little tricky to follow at times, but there has been some good results, as you mentioned just now. If you look really tightly, I think, particularly on the men's side with what they did at the ITA regionals, for the Ohio Valley region, some really strong individual performances in that group as well. But I'm excited to see them, come out on the court soon. I got a sneak peek of Jimmy Borendame's schedule for the men, and it is loaded. Y'all will be very excited to see the teams he's got coming to campus and the ATC this winter and this spring. Going to be a lot of really fun nights out there under the lights on those courts. I know he likes to have a really rowdy environment. And college tennis is the best spectator sport that nobody knows about. This is something I've claimed on this podcast before, but it's a really fun environment. And, I can't wait till we get to experience that again, once we get back, next semester.
Yeah, and to wrap up that ITA Masters conference that I was talking about, Kareem Alman was actually the only one that competed there and lost in his first round draw. But all eyes will be turned to the individual championships that are coming up in Waco, Texas on the 21st of this month. So, a lot of good stuff from the tennis programs as usual. I'm always excited to see what that schedule looks like because much like our women's basketball team, again, men's tennis, they do not disappoint with the level of competition that they bring on a nightly basis. So excited to see that. And of course, it's always a great atmosphere at the Adams Tennis Complex and now the new outdoor complex. Very beautiful. So if you haven't made the plans to go out there, you should do so. Obviously a great facility as well as you're going to see great competition. And you're going to see tennis played at a very high level out there with Borendame and the Raiders alike. So lastly, wrap things up, golf season. We've got new coach Walmsley Gasecki in her first year there here in Murfreesboro for the ladies program. They got a win at the Cardinals Cup. Impressive year for them. They actually had a strong finish. And then the men had a great year or a great fall as well. JJ Zimmer in particular is who I look at that had a great fall. But and they mixed up a lot of their lineups this fall. So I look forward to what the men's team does, but really the women's team too, for the same reason as tennis, having a lot of change up this year. So we're hoping to see that success they had in the fall carry over to their spring season.
Well, I think that win in the Cardinals Cup for women's golf is going to be big going forward under a new coach. I think it gave, the players returning confidence that they could succeed, under a new regime and in a new coaching staff. And probably gave, Coach Walmsley some confidence in who she had in the program as well, and showed them the level that they could perform at as they look to get this program back into the top of Conference USA. So very excited to see what they do in the spring as they get a little bit closer to the conference tournament season. Hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to Coach Walmsley on my airwaves soon. We're planning a little fall and review, coach's corner with her, before, she goes on maternity leave a little bit later, this winter. So, best luck to her and her family with that. But, hopefully we get a chance to talk to her a little bit and get her thoughts on everything. And I'll be sure to keep you all posted on GoBlueRaiders.com if and when that comes out. And then on the men's golf side, very young team for Coach McIntyre. A lot of new faces that he is trying to figure out who his 5 is going to be. And like you said, there's been players like JJ Zimmer who have stepped up, and then there have been players who have been a little bit more inconsistent. So I think finding that 5 is going to be the key sort of through this, late fall into winter period as these guys are, working on their games to stick in the lineup and be a little more consistent. I think if you look at the sort of the scores round to round, they haven't been able to avoid having like sort of 2 bad rounds in the thing. Like you play 5, you score 4. Hopefully you can, if one guy's off, and then hopefully the other 4 aren't. I think that they've just had, too many rounds where 2 guys have had off days, to consistently, be at the level that they're expecting. And so finding, having more rounds like they did the last round of their last tournament where JJ Zimmer's the score that you're dropping, I think at 1 over, is going to be key for this program going forward, is where you're having all 5 of those guys pushing. And their best performances in recent years under Coach McIntyre have been rounds like that. So finding those guys and getting them more consistent, I think is going to be key going forward.
Absolutely good and exciting stuff for them as they come towards the spring season. Sam, I appreciate you coming on as always with all the information that you got for us. You teased a little bit there with your Coach's Corner fall in review. Anything else that we can look forward to seeing from you, as well as anything from the athletic communications department coming up?
Well, what I'm really excited about this year with our basketball season is we've sort of changed content flow on my end for what I do. So normally I'm like in the years past, I was writing, sort of our recap after each game, which is a little bit more formulaic. And, there's a little more flair that I would put into it maybe than an SID would when I was putting it together. But it still took a lot of my time on game night. So we've changed the workflow. And now we have other people in our office doing the more, hard facts recap. And I get to write a sidebar after every game that comes out the next morning of. So you've already seen 2 of those come out, one for the men's game against Oglethorpe, and then one for the women's game against Grand Canyon on Friday. Those came out the next morning. And so hopefully be a little bit more creative writing, a little bit more, insight into sort of what's going on. And so you get more regular updates, about, the ins and outs of those programs from me as the season goes on. Something that, we targeted is something that people clearly wanted. And hopefully you guys enjoy that going forward, because I've enjoyed, at least, through 2 games, putting that stuff in.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of good stuff from Sam, as always, over at GoBlueRaiders.com, and of course his X/Twitter account, SJ Doughton. Sam, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we look forward to having you on again sometime in December, I'm sure.
Thanks so much, Jake. Y'all have a great one.
All right. And again, thanks for you listening to today's episode. We look forward to next week, where we will actually have on a Lady Raiders guest basketball player, as well as we'll wrap up all things with the Lady Raiders and men's basketball games this last week. Don't forget to follow us on all of our social media accounts at Blue Raider Pod. And until next time, go Blue.